Assalamu alaikum. My name is Kimberly. My Islamic name is Hadija. I reverted to Islam in 2017 and found myself struggling with my faith. I started this channel as a way to hold myself accountable and build a small Islamic community. I'm also learning that I am helping other Islamic reverts learn about Islam. My last video was about the Adhan, Muslims' call to prayer. And the first person to call the Adhan was Bilal. In honor of Black History Month, I wanted to share Bilal's story. Bilal ibn Rabah al-Habashi was Islam's first Muezzin. Bilal was the son of a Habshi princess named Hamama. Now the Habshi came from Habasha, which is today's Ethiopia. And Hamama was part of an Abyssinian army that was involved in trying to destroy the Kaaba in 570 AD. This year sounds familiar because it is also the year our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born. They know this year as the year of the elephant, and they call it this because the Aksumite army led by Abraha, who was a Yemen leader, gathered his allies and a bunch of war elephants and basically trampled their way through Mecca trying to destroy the Kaaba. Through divine intervention, they were defeated, and most of that army, which included the princess Hamama, was put into slavery. Now, I don't know how old Hamama was when she was placed into slavery, but they do say she was a girl. And within 10 years, she was married to an Arab slave by the name of Rabah. And in 580 AD, Rabah and the princess Hamama gave birth to their son Bilal. This makes Bilal about 10 years younger than our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Bilal was biracial. He was half Arab and half what we would call Ethiopian. And he became the first person of African descent to convert to Islam. And his conversion was not easy. So Bilal was born and raised in slavery. And he decided that if he could show his loyalty and work hard, he could move up the ranks of slavery. And his idea worked. He was eventually purchased by someone named Umayyah bin Khalifa. And Umayyah was an elite Meccan businessman and a Qurayshi tribal leader. Now, the Quraysh tribe was kind of the big tribe at the time, and they were Arab and they were pagan. So the leaders of the Quraysh tribe, which included Umayyah, despised our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because the religion of Islam really threatened their way of life. They didn't want to lose their status in society. They didn't want to lose the money they made off the Kaaba. And they actually worried that Islam would kind of destroy the integrity of the Quraysh tribe. There's also stories of how these businessmen were quite envious of our young Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They felt like they were the high status people in the society, and Allah should have chosen them to reveal the Quran to, rather than such a common person like our Prophet Muhammad. Well, Bilal being Umayyah's personal slave, he was often in the room when the Qurayshi leaders talked about our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the Islamic movement. Bilal was born in slavery, and he had times that he watched his mother be beaten. And this was something that hurt him and he carried with him for his whole life. So when he heard that in Islam you acknowledge just one Allah and it puts all of humanity on one singular plane, and the only way to transcend it is by your devotion to Allah, he decided right there that he was going to declare himself an Islamic convert. Eventually, his master Umayyah heard that his own personal slave Bilal had converted to Islam right under his nose. And, Umayyah wasn't just angry about it, he was also quite embarrassed by it. And he declared that he was going to make Bilal an example. And this actually turned out to be an impossible task. The first thing Umayyah did was put a collar on Bilal and drag him out to the desert. And he didn't give him any water or food. And after time, he would say, Bilal, are you ready to denounce Islam? And Bilal would answer, Ahad, Ahad, which means one, one. So after a little while, the desert didn't work. So Umayyah kind of upped his game, and he got a hold of the gangsters of Ta'if. Apparently, and I didn't do a lot of research on this, but Ta'if was like a ghetto of the area that was run by some very brutal gangs. And he went to some of the gang leaders and said, look, you take Bilal and you abuse and violate him in any way you would like. And the story says that they did that. In fact, it says the streets of Ta'if were streaked with Bilal's blood. And I don't know how long he had to endure that torture with the gangs, but eventually Umayyah went to Bilal and said, are you ready to denounce Islam? And Bilal replied, Ahad, Ahad, one, one. So in his final effort to break the spirit of Bilal, Umayyah took Bilal to the desert and tied him down and put a giant hot boulder on his chest. And as Bilal was laying there hot and not being able to breathe, Umayyah stood next to him and he said, die here or denounce Muhammad and worship Allah and Al-Uzza. Now, Allah and Al-Uzza were two of the pagan gods, and these two gods actually had idols inside the Kaaba. And even though he had all that pressure on his chest and he could hardly breathe, he was able to say, Ahad, Ahad, one, one. And then he laid there. And that day, the boulder was too heavy, and the sun was too hot, and his mouth was too dry, and he closed his eyes to drift off to his death. So behind the scenes, and something he didn't know, is that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Abu Bakr had also heard the stories of this black slave who was tortured and would respond with Ahad, Ahad. And they often went to Umayyah to purchase Bilal. And Umayyah always said no. However, this time, since Bilal is dying in the desert, Umayyah decides, I'm going to sell him this time just to make a little money off of him as he's dying. And Abu Bakr went to him and said, how much would it be to purchase Bilal? And Umayyah says, that'll be 10 dinars, which apparently was a whole lot of money for a slave back then. And Abu Bakr pays the 10 dinars. And Umayyah, being the person he is, looks at Abu Bakr and says, if you had argued a little bit and tried to negotiate, I would have sold him for 1 dinar. And Abu Bakr turns to him and says, by Allah, I would have purchased his freedom for 100 dinars if you had asked for it. So meantime, Bilal is unconscious in the desert. And as the sun starts to set, he starts to wake up a little bit. And he realizes he's not dead. And then he's like, there's no more boulder on my chest. What's going on? And as he starts to flutter open his eyes, he sees somebody standing over him. And it's our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who has purchased Bilal's freedom. So Bilal and Muhammad, peace be upon them, become confidants and friends, and the Prophet Muhammad trusts him greatly. Bilal actually became the first treasurer for the Muslims. And as time went on, we all know Abdullah bin Zayed goes to Muhammad, peace be upon him, with the words of the Adhan. And the Prophet Muhammad chooses Bilal for his calm, resonant, melodious voice. But there's something extra special to this, because the Prophet Muhammad says, whoever says these words with certainty will enter paradise. So by handing the Adhan to Bilal, he actually guarantees Bilal's entrance into heaven. Bilal went on all of the Prophet Muhammad's journeys, and Bilal went through all the battles. And one of their battles was the Battle of Badr. And in the Battle of Badr, who does Bilal run across but his ex-master Umayyah? And this is where Bilal got his revenge and was able to kill Umayyah. And from then on, he was truly free. In fact, he was known as the master who was freed by our master. So people thought quite highly of him. He was also with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the day that they were able to take the Kaaba. And they got inside the Kaaba and they destroyed all the idols so that the Muslims could pray to the Kaaba without any idol worship. And it kind of showed that Islam was taking over. On that day, the Prophet Muhammad said, please stand on top of the Kaaba and call the Adhan. Bilal went on top of the Kaaba and called the Adhan for all the Muslims. And he is the only man in history to have been able to do that. Bilal was asked that through his torture, why did he ever just answer with Ahad, Ahad, one, one? And Bilal said, that was all I knew of Islam. If I had known more, I would have said more. That's really the basis of Islam. Take everything else out of it. If you acknowledge that there is just one God and it is Allah, then Allah puts you on the same field as everybody else in humanity. And you have the choice to transcend that by your devotion to Allah. The death of Muhammad came in 632 AD, and it really destroyed Bilal. Bilal was asked to do the Adhan at Muhammad, peace be upon him's funeral, and he only got to the part where he was like, Salah Allahu Allahi wasalam, and he couldn't say the Prophet's name, peace be upon him. He just started to cry uncontrollably, and he said to the crowd, he said, look, by Allah, I will never do the Adhan again in my life. He did do it 2 more times for some friends of Muhammad, peace be upon him, just kind of favors. I'm not sure what those 2 occasions actually were. But other than that, he never did the Adhan again. And he actually couldn't stay in Medina any longer. He said that everything in Medina reminded him of his dear friend and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he finally went to Damascus, Syria, and that's where he lived out the rest of his life. And in 640 AD, Bilal did fall victim to the plague. And on his deathbed, his wife said, oh, what a day of grief. And he said, no, this is a great day because I'll be seeing my beloved Prophet Muhammad. And with that, he rejoiced. So as I close out, I want to say a couple of things. I mean, I think Bilal is the one who showed us how simple Islam can be. Your love for Allah makes you a better person. Your devotion to Allah makes you a better person. Otherwise, we're all the same. I wanted to share a passage from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his last sermon in 632 AD. And he said, all mankind is from Adam and Eve. An Arab is not superior over a non Arab, nor a non Arab is superior over an Arab. Also, a white has no superiority over a black, and a black has no superiority over a white, except by taqwa. And taqwa is your devotion to Allah, your fear of Allah, your submission to Allah, and your good actions. And that is the story of Bilal.